October is the time of year in which we embrace things that we find creepy or scary or whatever, and in celebration of this, the entire month of October will be dedicated to Halloween-themed topics. And to start this off, today on Gaming Mysteries, I'll be talking about the Pokemon Lost Silver Creepypasta. Now, as with a lot of these creepypasta stories, they tend to be, well, stories. So the structure of my video will be me reading it while inserting comments throughout the story when I can, attempting to summarize certain points. Granted, I looked this over and there aren't too many points I could summarize, and ultimately giving my final thoughts on the subject. It is worth noting that there is a fan game that you can check out that will take you through the events of this story, and I'll be showing some of that footage along with some generic Pokemon Silver footage, but with that out of the way, let's hop into what I like to call bullshit story time. Hope you guys are ready to listen, because I have to read a lot of text. The story of Lost Silver begins with a simple college student who was very enthusiastic about the release of Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver, but being busy with college and being poor at the time, he wasn't able to purchase Soul Silver at its launch date. So after his school year ended, he ordered a copy of the game off of Amazon, though it would take 2 weeks to arrive, so he decided to replay Pokemon Crystal in the meantime. It was then that he realized that his mother had thrown away the game long ago because the save went dead, and he was very upset. She apparently also threw away his silver version too. She kinda sounds like a bitch, but with no other options, he went to GameStop to pick up a copy of Pokemon Silver, which I just have to insert right here that he left out the portion of the GameStop visit that involves them trying to get you to subscribe to the Game Informer magazine 8 million times, and even when you say no, it still somehow shows up in the mail. To this day, I still don't understand that shit. Anyways, he went home and expected a nostalgia trip, but things began to get bizarre. And this is most likely why I'm reading this. It's like the game is in my thoughts. Upon booting the Game Freak logo appeared as normal, but it froze. Thinking it was an error, he turned the Game Boy on and off, but the same thing happened over and over again. He tried to press the other buttons to get a response, and eventually the logo vanished and a black screen showed up for roughly 5 seconds. After this though, instead of going to the main menu, he was already in-game in a previous save file, though this didn't bother him much. Personally, it would bother me a little bit, but whatever. The player first checked the trainer's profile, and it said that there was 999.99 hours put into the game, with all 16 badges, and 999,999 Pokédollars. Plus, all 251 Pokemon in the Pokedex. The player assumed that the previous owner either used a Game Shark or was just a really hardcore Pokemon fan. Personally, I think that if you sink that much time in a game, that you've gone past the hardcore fan point and you're bordering on insanity. And that, again, that's just me though. The player then went on to check to see what team this hardcore Pokemon player had, but to his surprise, it was a team consisting of 5 unknowns and a 6th Pokemon named Hurry. The player assumed it was just some kind of joke from the person who last played the game, but even so, he checked the profiles of the Pokemon anyways, and each unknown had a different letter of the alphabet, but he noticed that the Pokemon all spelled out Leave. The last member of the team was a level 5 Cyndaquil with 1 HP and it only had 2 attacks, Leer and Flash. At the time, the player didn't know why it was named Hurry, so he simply disregarded that, but he couldn't disregard that all of the Pokemon didn't have their usual cries, as what replaced those was pure silence. But at this point, he had had enough of looking through this shitty team. He closed the menu and noticed that he was in an area that appeared to be the room that's inside Bellsprout Tower, though there were no NPCs around, the pillar wasn't moving, and there was no music, nor an exit or ladder that he could see. He walked around for a few minutes to find a way out, but couldn't find one. Then he thought that he could get out using an escape rope. He checked his inventory, but it was empty. But finally, he did find a ladder, which was behind the pillar. Dick move, game. The screen went to black and the music finally began to play, though the player felt a chill as it was the music from the Elf Ruins. Ooh, scary. Now the fade to black turned out not to be just a transition, but instead a situation in which you would need to use Flash. Remembering that his Cyndaquil had Flash, he used the move, and the room lit up, but he regretted it as the room was a chilling blood red, with a linear gray path heading south, and the ladder he had used to get into the room was gone. Having no other options, he headed south, and with every 20 steps, the screen got darker, until he finally made it to the end, where he saw a sign, and the sign said, "Turn back now." Immediately, he was asked to answer yes or no, but no question was asked, so he chose yes, and the screen went to black again, made a ladder climbing sound, the unknown radio music stopped, and was soon replaced with the Pokeflute radio music. He was then presented with yet another dark room, so he used Flash again, but this time it said that Hurry, his Cyndaquil, had fainted, which was odd. Well, because that's not supposed to happen. Flash couldn't kill anyone if it tried. I know, I've tried. The player checked his party and noticed that none of his original team was there. They were all replaced with a team of level 10 unknowns, and they spelled out, "He died." This aside, the room he was in was quite small, only 4 squares big, as if he was inside something hollowed out, and outside the room was a bunch of graves similar to those found in Pokemon Red and Blue. Think of Lavender Town. Or don't think of Lavender Town, I don't know. It was at this point he concluded that this was clearly a hacked game, which, it took you this long to figure that shit out? But, like in all these stories, curiosity kept him going. He decided to check the trainer's profile again. But what was odd was that the trainer was missing his arms, and his appearance was less smug, and he had more of a sad, empty look about him. As he should have, seeming as his arms were removed. You'd be pretty bummed too. The game also said that he had 24 badges, which was clearly impossible. Counting past 16 is just a myth, and if anyone tells you otherwise, liars. Anyways, after a few minutes of aimlessly wandering around, his character suddenly spun and did the escape route animation. But instead of going up, he spun down slowly, as if sinking. After that screen, the music stopped, and when finally landing, his character was colored differently, appearing completely white. The player checked the trainer profile again, and the trainer was indeed all white. Oh, and his legs were missing, and he had what appeared to be bloody tears coming from his eyes. As should have been the case, as his legs were removed, along with the arm thing. Oh, and now he had 32 badges. This change in number began to disturb the player as it seemed to represent something. Personally, though, I'd be more disturbed by the floating torso that is now your character, but that's just me. He checked his Pokemon team again, and again it was different. It contained 5 unknowns and a level 100 Celebi. The unknowns this time spelled out dying. The player checked Celebi's profile, and it was a shiny Celebi, but only half of the sprite was there. 1 leg, 1 arm, 1 eye, and 1 attack. Perish Song. The area he was in was the Sprout Tower area that he was in before, except everything was red. He walked north for what seemed like forever, and eventually he encountered generic NPCs, so it's finally becoming a normal Pokemon game, you guys. Great! They were all lined up to the side, facing the pillar, and they were all also white. And he couldn't talk to them, so he moved forward until the pillar finally appeared to be chopped off, with a transparent red in its spot. He went up to red, and without pressing a button, he was engaged in battle. The player's character was still a depressing floating torso man, and red was still transparent. And though he had sworn that he had a bunch of unknowns, the game showed that both he and red only had 1 Pokemon each. The player had Celebi, and red had a level 255 Pikachu, who had blood coming from his eyes. Fantastic! The kids are gonna love this one. Now, once in battle, rather than being presented with the normal options, he was only given the option to attack, and since Celebi only had 1 move, he chose it. Pikachu went first and used Curse, and then Celebi used Perish Song, so in 3 turns, both Pokemon would faint. It was at this point that he wasn't taken back to the fight menu, and the battle just continued on by itself. The battle continued until the effects of Perish Song came into play, though instead of the game telling him that Celebi had fainted, it said that Celebi had died. That's not good for the kids. Even more odd, Pikachu was still there, so I'm going to have to call hacks on that one. Though that yellow bastard had 1 more trick up his sleeve and used Destiny Bond, and after that, it said that Pikachu had died. The player won that battle, and Red responded with a well thought out series of dots. That man is so well spoken. But it was at this point that the player got all freaked out, because Red's character sprite's head was cut off, leaving his body behind, and then the battle ended, which, that'll do it. That's taking rage quitting to a whole nother level. Pulling out the Ethernet cable is for pussies. Beheading yourself, on the other hand, is pretty hardcore. Go big or go home, as they say. After this, he was back in the overworld, with another change to his character's sprite, as now he was transparent, like Red was. The player quickly checked the trainer profile, and the only thing left of his trainer was his head, with transparent skin. But the head was zoomed in a bit, showing a black void in his eyes, which, if all my body except my head was missing, I would have a black void in my eyes too. I'm just saying, guys. It also stated that he now had 40 badges. The player proceeded to check his Pokemon, and they were all level 20 shiny unknowns that spelled out no more. And the player was now at what he now knows was the end. He was back in his room in New Barktown with no music playing. The player thought to himself that he might be able to play the game properly now, which, at that point, would you even want to? Granted, Pokemon would be a lot more interesting if all the trainers were floating heads. Go ahead and take that idea, Nintendo. Seriously, do it. Just take it. You don't have to pay me. Just do it. He walked around his room to interact with various things, though nothing worked. So he went downstairs, and everything appeared normal, except his mom wasn't home. Awful mother. At this point, he decided to go outside, but the door didn't work, and he instead walked through it to a void. There you go. He continued south to see what was going on, and as he headed south into the void, his house disappeared, as houses tend to do in real life. While moving south, his character's sprite turned white to contrast the pitch black, and he eventually entered a white area, and the character's sprite turned back to how it was before, and he continued south without thinking of stopping at all. Finally, after a long walk, he finally encountered something, and it was his trainer's regular sprite. He talked to it, and he said, "Goodbye forever," and vanished. That man had awful social skills, but as that happened, it said, question mark, question mark, question mark, use nightmare, and his trainer spun downwards, as it did so in the beginning. He was back in the hollowed out area that he was in earlier in the story, though technically he wasn't there because there was no actual character sprite. There, he checked his trainer's profile, and the trainer was completely gone. It also said that he had 0 badges, and all of the pictures of the Johto gym leaders were replaced with skulls. Something else the kids are gonna love. He checked his team of Pokemon yet again, and this time they were all unknowns. Again, but this time they spelled out, "I'm dead." He then went to the overworld. The room that he was supposedly in was covered with the same blocks as the walls. He then figured out what exactly that room was when the final text was said. R.I.P. That room was a big grave, surrounded by other graves. Gold, the trainer, has already been dead. He died presumably a few years after he defeated Red. He was a young trainer who, despite his efforts in collecting so many badges and attempts at becoming a Pokemon Master, was still unable to avoid the inevitable fate of death, and his efforts were eventually forgotten by the next generation. The player was unable to escape the text. It chased him. He tried resetting the game, but the same thing happened. So at this point, he gave up on the game. And that's the story of this alleged hack version of Pokemon Silver. Yeah, reading. Now, is this real? No. We'll dismiss the obvious, "Oh, well, it's a creepypasta, so it's fake," thing for this, and try some logic, just for funsies. Now, as far as this being an actual game that one could purchase at a GameStop, given the time of the story, it's very unlikely he was sold this. Reason being is that he said in the story that he was looking forward to Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver, 2 games that were released in 2010, the same year as this story, and I know for a fact-ish that GameStops weren't really carrying any Game Boy related products during that time frame, or at least mine wasn't. Game Boy Advance stuff maybe, but there was nothing on the original Game Boy shit. Not to mention, any game that's traded in a GameStop has to be tested, and since the fucked upness of this story happens right out of the gate, someone would have noticed it, and it wouldn't have been sold, nor would have been put on the shelves to begin with. With that said, throwing logic out the window for a bit, the story is still believable. I mean, a game that's designed in this fashion can certainly exist. Hell, the fan project is proof of that. And even the act of buying a hacked game isn't completely unreasonable. At GameStop it is, but at other places like China, not so much. And to top it off, this story is actually really good, and does a good job of making it seem believable, as it doesn't make the mistakes some of the shitty creepypasta stories make, which is overemphasizing stuff like, oh, there's blood everywhere and I'm so scared, and then Sonic jumped out of the TV and he was a plushie and I was like, what? And all that generic bullshit that just pulls out any sense of realism from the story. Sonic jumping out of a TV and he's a fucking fuck that shit. Lost Silver's concept is reasonable and realistic to some degree, and nothing really stupid happened in the story, like a doll flying out of a television or your computer screen. You guys may know what I've been referencing for the last couple of seconds or so. I don't actually know how long. And I might talk about that story one day, if for no other reason than to just get a good laugh. But yeah, the story of Lost Silver is well written, it's enjoyable, and it doesn't ham it up, and for that, I applaud it. If you'd like to read it for yourself, there will be a link to the story in the description of this video. But this has been Gaming Mysteries. Thanks for watching.